This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, health, tax, professional advice. We're not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast. This podcast is not intended to replace professional medical advice. The views expressed in this podcast may not be those of the host or the management. This podcast may contain adult themes, so parental discretion is advised. So welcome to the Modern Titus to Women Unplugged podcast. Our podcast is one where we dive fearlessly into the unspoken struggles that shape the lives of women today. As part of our mentoring role, we seek resources and support designed to help women thrive. We explore strategies for achieving optimal well-being and performance in every aspect of our life. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Angela Griffith, also known as the Christian Sexpert. Angela is a leading voice in the world of marriage, sex, and intimacy, with a passion for helping couples strengthen their relationship in ways that honor both their faith and their connection. She offers a compassionate and insightful approach to topics that often go unspoken. So welcome, Angela.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, we have a lot to cover here. But if you want to expound, I introduced you, but if you want to expound on any credentials or anything, further that you want to add to the introduction, go ahead.
Absolutely. I'm Angela. I'm the Christian Sexpert. I talk all things sex and intimacy and Christian marriage. I am a sex and intimacy coach, public speaker, and social media influencer.
Okay, so there you have it there. So we're going to start off by asking you to explain what are the 12 types of intimacy and why are they essential to a happy marriage?
Absolutely. The 12 types of intimacy is one of the foundational things that I work on with clients that come into my coaching practice, because we need ways to intentionally build our marriages. And with marriages don't just happen. Good marriages don't just happen. You have to be intentional about them. And using the 12 types of intimacy is a great way for couples to be intentional about making sure their marriage is strong and healthy. So running down the list of the 12 types, we have aesthetic intimacy, which is all about like moments of beauty together. Those are like your Instagrammable moments, like, oh, we're sitting on a beach watching the sunset.
Mm-hmm.
The next one is commitment intimacy. That's all about where you've been, where you're going as a couple. Communication intimacy, self-explanatory. Conflict. This is one where a lot of couples get hung up because they are afraid of conflict, because especially the millennials, Gen Xers, we were not taught how to handle conflict well. And so conflict intimacy is a very important one. Creative intimacy is how are you being creative together? Crisis intimacy is one that people don't really think about, but it's how do you handle each other in a crisis? How do you relate to each other in a crisis? Not everyone is great in a crisis, and that can really impact your marriage. Emotional intimacy is super self-explanatory. Intellectual intimacy is all about holding space for why your partner thinks the way that they do, or kind of learning and growing together. Mm-hmm. Recreational intimacy is a really big one. That's all about how you have fun together. So if you think about when you were dating and things like that, the basis of the majority of your intimacy would have been recreational intimacy, because you were going out and doing things and having fun. And that's what kept bringing you back together, was the fun that you were having together. The next one is sexual. Obviously, as the Christian Sexpert, that is a very important part, but it is only 1/12 of the equation. So sexual intimacy, spiritual intimacy. Are you praying together? Are you worshiping together? Are you going to church together? And the last one, these are all alphabetical order. I think you need all 12 of them. I would not rank one as more important than the other. Work intimacy. Now, don't make it weird and like try and go to work with your husband. Work intimacy is How are you pursuing your goals together? It's things like cooking a meal together or working in the garden together. It's pursuing mutual goals, working towards mutual goals.
Sort out which one of these that they're missing. How does one identify which of the 12 the couple are missing in the relationship?
Usually, if a couple comes to me and is presented this list, they will have a light bulb moment and they'll say, oh my gosh, like our recreational intimacy is non-existent. We have not, I can't remember the last time we played and had fun together. So usually simply reviewing the list brings a lot of clarity for a couple. I do have resources on my website and things if couples want to go deeper in the 12 types of intimacy. But one of the things that I see most often, especially in couples with younger children, is a lack of recreational and communication intimacies. Those two are the ones that tend to be the most overlooked because in the busyness of day-to-day life, it's really easy to move on to the next thing on your to-do list and not think about, I need to stop and play and have fun. And so recreational intimacy is definitely one that I see a lot of couples lacking.
Okay. And in regard to the overall sexual connection, what does the role of emotional intimacy, which is one of the 12, playing into it?
So they are all of the intimacies work together and are interconnected. And you definitely need the emotional connection in order to be able to experience the sexual connection. I have a few different key phrases that I use a lot in my work that I'll run through. So one of them is, sex is supposed to be the celebration of intimacy that you've already established before you ever get to the bedroom, which means you cannot rely on sex to create and maintain intimacy in your marriage. You need to be actively pursuing the other 11 types of intimacy in order for the sexual intimacy to truly flow naturally. So many couples come to me and say, we have, this drive disparity. He wants it more often than the wife wants it. And I say, okay, let's look at this and where are you guys lacking in these other intimacies? And they're like, oh, well, we never talk. There's no communication and intimacy. We don't play together. There's no recreational intimacy. Okay, well, it's no wonder there's no sexual intimacy because you have to have the other 11 ingredients before you can have the sexual intimacy. And so intentionally investing in the other 11 intimacies will really enable the sexual intimacy to start to flow. So one of my favorite examples to use is if I'm feeling disconnected from my husband, and I'm just not feeling that interested in going to bed with him, I'm going to look at the list. I'm going to figure out, okay, we're busy. He's often not home because of his job. And, our kid has extracurriculars that we're running to 3 times a week, 4 times a week. We're just kind of 2 ships in the night and I'm feeling disconnected. So our go-to recreational intimacy is board games. We love playing board games together. And I don't know how board games work in your house, but in my house, recreational intimacy via board games is also going to involve conflict and communication intimacies, because I'm going to have to communicate how big a loser he is and how badly he's going to lose tonight.
There you go.
And not everybody has that sort of play fight dynamic to their marriage, and that's okay, but we do. We have a play fight dynamic in our marriage and it works for us. So I'm going to use my communication intimacy to communicate how big a loser he is. Conflict intimacy will ensue. We will use our communication intimacy to make up upon my victory. And at the end of the night, I'm going to feel more inclined to go to bed with him because we have now worked on 3 of the other intimacies throughout the evening. And it was never I didn't have to talk myself into it. He didn't have to talk me into it. It flowed naturally from the creation of the other intimacies.
And sometimes in relationship, when it comes to the spiritual intimacy part of it, because sometimes one person's spiritual journey might be further along than the other. So how when this happens, how does the faith journey affect the different stages in the relationship, the spiritual intimacy part of it? Because they're different stages of spirituality.
Absolutely. This is a big hang up I see with a lot of women because they have bought this narrative that, well, men are supposed to be leading the home. And I have been, I'm further along in my quote, further along in my faith walk, and he's not leading me. And then they get frustrated and then they get resentful because they are saying, well, he's not spiritually leading me and all of these things. But that's biblically, it says that we are to be as iron sharpening iron. And it says that let the stronger brother help the weaker. So if the wife is the one with more Bible knowledge or more spiritual maturity, there is nothing prohibiting her from saying, hey, do you want to go through this Bible study with me? Hey, do you want to pray with me? One thing I encourage all of my couples to do is to serve in ministry together, serve in some sort of ministry together. And that doesn't have to mean that, you give up every single Sunday morning to serve in the church nursery side by side. It can mean that you guys sign up to work together at the special events that your church hosts. Or there's a church near me that does respite nights for special needs families. And they bring in families to do one-on-one with the special needs kids while the special needs parents get to go out for 2 hours for dinner. And they'll have like a husband-wife team stick with a single kid for the whole night. The kid has a blast playing. Husband and wife have now served their community together in a spiritual intimacy sort of way. Everybody wins. The special needs family gets a break. The kid has the time of their life. And now the volunteers who volunteer together at the end of the night, yeah, they're probably exhausted, but they serve together and they're going to feel more intimate and more spiritually connected. So easy things to do are things like just have a culture of constant worship music in your house, especially if you have like smart home devices. It is so easy to just say, hey, robot, put on some worship music. And working together to create that culture, no matter who is taking the lead on it. As long as that culture is created, the Holy Spirit is capable of doing the work.
Yeah, I like that. I like what you said about, especially with the special needs. I think that's a great idea because, as you correctly said, a lot of these parents don't get an opportunity to go because somebody has to be there to take care of the child. Yes, I like that. That's something I think a lot of our listeners could probably implement in their church.
Yeah, and that's a quarterly thing. So even if the only time that you guys are serving the church community side by side is a quarterly basis, it's more than you were doing before.
Yes, that's true. Quarter is
So
better than zero.
yes. So progress over perfection. You guys don't have to be, my husband and I are not currently in a season where we are serving side by side in church every Sunday morning. In fact, my ministries are outside of our current church building, but his current ministry is inside the church building. And that is simply the season that God has pulled us in. There have been other seasons where we served side by side as youth pastors or in other ministries. Not every season of your life is going to always be side by side spiritually. We go through seasons change, and it's okay. It does not have to be perfect. It does not let go of what you think spiritual intimacy is supposed to be, and let the Holy Spirit lead you to what he's actually calling you to.
Right. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Now, in regard to intellectual intimacy, Can you share some practical tips for fostering that?
Yes, absolutely. Listen to podcasts like this one and then discuss them.
Yeah.
Send this to your husband and say, oh my gosh, this woman, the Christian Sexpert, has the most amazing ideas for our marriage. Why don't you listen to this so we can talk about what she suggests? That is such an easy way to engage in intellectual intimacy. We're in an election year. Discussing politics is a dangerous yet very valid form of intellectual intimacy that might start to bring in some conflict intimacy, but that's just another example of how they all build on each other.
Yes, that is so true. That is so true. So in regard to couples where one person has breached the relationship, probably other extramarital, affair, whatever the case is, how do you bridge this? Which one of these intimacy of the 12 intimacy do you use, or is there something else that you use to bring back the trust?
I think we live in a culture today that doesn't know how to wait. And we look for our to-do list and we want to move through and check off all of these things on a list. And if I follow this recipe, if I follow this TikTok with 5 how-tos, I can fix this and then we'll just be over it and move on with our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not how it works when the trust has been broken in a marriage. Trust requires your spouse to act in a way that is trustworthy.
Right.
So it requires, first of all, repentance. It requires your spouse to show repentance through their actions and their behaviors, not just their words, because they can swear up and down that they'll never do it again. But until they put action behind it, whatever that action is, I guarantee you there are actions, no matter how trust has been breached, that they can show you that they are serious about it. Most often, I'm going to stress that one of those actions needs to be therapy with a licensed clinical therapist or clinical counselor specializing in whatever it is they're facing, whether if it's pornography usage, get in with a certified sex addiction therapist. Find a 12-step program, something like that. That is the action, and consistent application of that action will start to show them as trustworthy. One of the things that I often see is the partner who did the betraying doesn't want to be reminded that they caused harm to their spouse and to their marriage. They think, well, you should just forgive me and we can move on and we don't ever have to talk about it again. But that's not how it works. The betrayed spouse needs the time and space to process their grief and their trauma. I suggest therapy with a betrayal trauma specialist for them. And the victimized spouse needs to be allowed space to say, hey, I need to check your phone. I need to know, what's going on, or I need this boundary put in place to feel safe again, or I'm just feeling really triggered by this very offhanded comment you made. I understand that you didn't have negative intention behind it, but I need to talk about how this made me feel, without the other spouse saying, oh my God, why are you not over this already? I thought you forgave me. And the thing is, it took years for you to build trust in your marriage, right? You didn't start dating and immediately assume that this person was going to trust you with their deepest, darkest secrets. No, you were years into your marriage before you trusted them with the deepest, darkest parts of yourself. So it's going to take years for that trust to be rebuilt. And it is through the continuous application of trustworthy behavior that trust is rebuilt over time. And we live in this culture that wants quick and easy fixes, but there is no quick and easy fix for betrayal. It takes months and years. for recovery to happen. And it is absolutely possible, but it is much harder than people want it to be.
Have you come across any cases where the person just can't forgive the person and they just want to walk away? Have you come across cases like that?
I have seen marriages like that. I don't typically do work with couples who are in that sort of a
Oh,
season,
that stage, okay.
because I really think that they need more intensive therapy than what I offer in coaching. But
Okay.
I want to be clear that God never prioritizes the institution of marriage over the safety of people who are living in the marriage.
I
And
agree
so
there.
if you are in a marriage where your vows and your safety are consistently violated, God never calls you to consistently violate your own safety and boundaries in order to worship at the altar of the covenant of marriage. God prioritizes the safety of his children over institutions. And so if you are in a marriage where your safety is in danger, please get to a place of safety and then make whatever decisions you need to make, but prioritize safety of you and any children over the Christian God hates marriage soapbox.
What do you mean?
I'm sorry, I just lost you for a second.
I was asking you if you meant God hates divorce.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, you said marriage.
Did I say God hates marriage? God hates divorce soapbox. Oh my goodness. So I am a 40-year-old woman with ADHD, and my brain makes alphabet soup out of words sometimes.
Okay.
And I was fully convinced I was said this very profound statement.
Yeah, I'm like, okay.
God hates divorce, not marriage. Yes. Well,
Fine.
this is great.
Yeah. But you know what, you know, when people start to have children, I'm sure that these 12 intimacy, these 12 types of intimacy are impacted because I remember when I started to have my children, it's like everything shifted. They became the focus. I mean, everything was all about them. And then the husband was like, oh, when I finish the children, I deal with you, but they're the first priority. So how does this affect having children, especially young children, and affect the whole intimacy thing here?
One of the things that I work with my coaching clients on is developing systems for intimacy, even with kids in the house.
Mm-hmm.
And because we have because prior to having kids, you're so very used to, oh, I feel disconnected. Let's just go on a romantic date. And so you've conditioned your brain to think that intimacy means you have to be alone with your spouse. And that's not realistic, especially in a season of young children. And so I really work on creating systems with my couples so that they can create moments of intimacy with each other, even with 17 children running around. So things like setting up once a week or once every 2 weeks, you set the kids up with a movie. Yes, I'm suggesting the use of screens. Everybody be horrified. But it's a very intentional use of screens.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, it works even better if you're a low screen family because now it's a special treat for them. You set them up with a movie and you set them up with a little kid charcuterie, an assortment of snacks. Kids hate meals, but kids love snacks. So you just turn everything into snacks. You put carrot sticks and ranch dip and fruit and vegetables. And if you put it all on a tray, they think it's a miracle. Kid brains are weird. And so you set that up in the living room with them. And then you and your husband are free to go into the kitchen together, cook an adult grown-up meal together. One of the things I love suggesting for my foodie couples is buy a new cookbook and cook through the cookbook together, recipe by recipe.
That's good. That's interesting.
even if it's a recipe you would never have like actually chosen by yourselves, but it's the process of systematically cooking through the cookbook together and writing down your notes on each recipe and giving each meal a rating. And then you've got this little scrapbook at the end of it of like this journey that you took together. So you guys go in the kitchen and cook a grown-up meal together. You can put light a little candle and eat while the kids are occupied. You guys are still available if somebody breaks another kid's leg, right? But they're mostly occupied and you guys are being intimate. And
Right,
so,
right.
and intimacy doesn't require you guys being alone. One of the things that we do as a family for intellectual intimacy is we have conversation cards that we got off Amazon. They're just simple decks of cards with conversation starters. And over dinner, when we eat dinner at the dinner table as a family, we break out the card deck and we ask the question on the card. And everybody goes around and answers the question. This is twofold. It's engaging my husband and I in intellectual intimacy with each other because one of our questions tonight was, what would you eat for breakfast every day if you could? And
Mm-hmm.
so, I got to engage my husband with, this question, but we are also modeling dinner time behavior and manners to our young son, and we're teaching him how to engage in intellectual conversations, which is something that's not something that's being intentionally taught to a lot of children now. So he is seeing mommy and daddy having respectful debates, intellectual conversation. He is learning those skills that he's going to need as an adult, and my husband and I are still having intimacy together. He's just there.
Interesting, very interesting. I like the concept of giving the kids the special movie night and giving them like there's a theater, give them the food items and all of that, and the cooking of a meal together.
Yes.
I think that's doable. That's doable. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's engaging work intimacy because cooking a meal together is work intimacy. You guys can engage in intellectual intimacy because if you sent your husband this podcast to listen to, now while you guys are cooking, you can talk about the podcast. And you guys can also engage in you could engage in spiritual intimacy. While you're eating dinner, break out a devotional and read a quick devotion together while you're eating. There's so many
Mm-hmm.
different intimacies that you can engage when you get creative and you're intentional about it.
Right, right, right. So let's look at the other end.
Mhm.
Okay, the woman is now going through menopause. Menopause, as has a lot of dryness. Some
Yeah,
people have, hair loss. Some people have, hormone changes. You know,
it's
mood
awful.
swings. Yeah,
Yes.
but yeah, just say it's awful. Yeah,
It's all I am in perimenopause and it is 0 stars. Do not recommend.
yeah, yeah. But I don't think about it unless you're going to use hormone replacement therapy. If you're going to use that, and that that needs to be. So the question is, what are the unique challenges to intimacy during this period, and how
A
do
lot
how
of
do
couples
mhm,
do struggle when the woman enters menopause. As you said, one of the big issues is going to be vaginal dryness. Another big issue is that the tissues in your vulva region are going to start to thin. You're going to be more prone to infection and micro cuts in the skin, and that can be incredibly painful. So
mhm,
the first thing is you need to buy stock in some lubricant.
mhm,
Honestly, just buy it by the
mhm,
vats,
mhm,
and get comfortable with using far more lubricant than you ever thought you would need to. But the other thing that I talk about is the other thing is if a woman is in perimenopause or menopause, her husband is now also at the age where he is statistically likely to start experiencing some issues with erectile dysfunction. And that brings, and then combining the two of them gets really complicated. So statistically, over 50% of men will be affected by erectile dysfunction at least once in their lifetime. And obviously, as men age, that becomes even more of an issue. And so one of the things that I talk about with my clients is you need to have a conversation and really talk about what role you see sex as playing in your marriage, and what do you define as sex? And this is the question that stuns so many people. What do you mean? How do I define sex? How do you define sex? Do you think sex is only sex if it involves penis and vagina penetration?
Mm-hmm.
Because sex is so much more than penis and vagina penetration.
Mm-hmm.
You can have sex and never have penetrative activities at all.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Mm-hmm.
so many things that you can be doing to enjoy each other sexually that does not ever have to involve penetration.
Mm-hmm.
And so having really clear and possibly uncomfortable discussions about what role sex plays in your marriage and
Mm-hmm.
how you define it and how you can redefine it to accommodate your changing bodies is
Mm-hmm.
imperative in this season of life.
So let's look at the other aspect. You know, you're probably in your career and you change job and you know or you've lost a job and there's the stress. How does stress affect intimacy during the
Stress
relationship?
has a huge impact on sexual intimacy and libido. We know that in order for human brains to truly be able to enter an aroused, sexually excited state, they need to be relaxed. And so if you are not relaxed, you are not going to be able to get in the mood for sex because your brain needs to be able to make that switch.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I suggest is we go back to recreational intimacy, because we know that in order to play, our brains have to be in a state of relaxation. And it's far easier to play when the stakes are lower than when you feel pressured to
Mm-hmm.
do something. So if
Right.
if you or your spouse are putting any sort of sexual pressure on you, we know that obligation kills desire. It's just not going to be good or happen or anything. But if you simply play together, how do you and your spouse enjoy play? This is one of the reasons that we see play wrestling in romantic couples across almost every culture on earth. Play wrestling, because it starts as this physical thing. You've got your blood pumping, endorphins going, and then your brain is relaxed enough to enter that play space, so it can very easily make the transition to sex because it's already relaxed. So figuring out how you enjoy, if you're stressed, you've had trauma, things like that. I want to say, first of all, it's okay to live in the season that you're in. If you are simply in a season of too much stress, it's okay to have an explicit conversation with your spouse and say, I need to not be pressured. We need to take this off the table for the next few weeks as I work through this season. There is nothing wrong with that. You are allowed to set sexual boundaries in your marriage. Absolutely. But if you are stressed and you are looking for ways to help yourself become more interested in sex again, absolutely look at play as the first line of defense, of interest generation, because play is going to be the easiest way to get you back into that headspace.
Right. So we're gonna talk about the whole issue of purity, the purity culture.
Yes, that's a big one.
Yes. So we want to talk about and how it influenced the way Christian couples approach intimacy in marriage.
People get really angry with me when I say that we need to stop using purity culture. That purity culture needs to go. People get so angry with me. And they're like, oh, you just want teenagers out here having orgies. No. Why do you think there's only, first of all, why do you think there's only two choices, orgies or purity culture? People do not have a lot of people don't have a real grasp and understanding of what purity culture is and the ramifications it caused. Purity culture is a specific set of teachings that relied on high control and shame techniques in an effort to control teenagers' behavior. It started in the late 70s as a kind of reaction to the free love movement of the 60s, and it is still continued in some churches today. We know through scientific studies that women who were raised in purity culture churches are twice as likely to experience female sexual dysfunction than their non-purity culture counterparts.
Mm-hmm.
And so that tells us that there is a big problem with purity culture teachings. Purity culture did things like told women that they were told girls, teenage girls, 12 to 17-year-old girls, that they were responsible for the salvation of their brothers, that if they wore a tank top, that it would cause their brothers to sin and go to hell, and they would be responsible. It told girls that it did things like there's books on the market that were geared for 12-year-old girls who said, make sure your belly is covered or else grown men will find your belly intoxicating. A grown man who finds a 12-year-old belly intoxicating is a pedophile, not somebody that don't tell little girls that. It put the responsibility of all of that on a little girl's shoulders, and she was supposed to then grow up and have no issues having sex. We have couples now who I have a couple who had been married for 5 or 6 years, and they still cannot have penetrative sex because it is so painful for her because of the effects of purity culture. And they came to me because they're trying to have a baby, but they can't have sex to have a baby because it's so painful. We have women who are afraid to let their husbands see them naked because they were shamed for so long about don't show your body to anyone. You can't just flip a switch and turn off those teachings that you sat under for years and years and years. And so it isn't that I don't think that we should be teaching biblical purity, but biblical purity and purity culture are not the same thing. Biblical purity is about doing what Jesus calls us to because Jesus has the best plan for our lives. It's not about how far can I go with this person I'm dating before it becomes sin. Or it's not about don't wear a tank top because a man will lust after you and it'll be your fault. Right? That's not what real biblical purity is about. We need to capture our children's hearts for Jesus and not give them a list of do's and don'ts and use shame and control because we know that shame and control don't work. Anyhow, I think I lost the plot and started ranting. I'm very passionate about purity culture and its problems.
You said, as it correctly said, people are using them interchangeably, but it's not the same thing. Basically, you know what you're saying there is not the same.
Yeah.
It's not the same teaching that Christ,
Yes. Yeah. Biblical purity is absolutely not the same thing as purity culture. Purity culture did things like it would separate the boys from the girls, and the boys would go play video games, and the boys would get told, just don't think about sex. And when you get married, your wife will be there to fulfill all of your desires. Okay, well, first of all, that's wrong because a wife is not a 24/7 sex vending machine. So first of all, that's not a thing. But then it would put the girls in this room. The youth pastor would come in with this rose and he would start like touching the rose and like playing with the petals. and smelling it, and he'd be like, oh, we're going to pass this rose around. You guys do whatever you want with the rose. And so now this rose has gone through the hands of 45 grubby, disgusting teenagers. So by the time that it gets back to the front of the room, it's no longer a rose, it is a stem, right? And now the youth pastor says, you know, if you have sex before marriage, this is what you're offering to your husband on your wedding night, is this dead rose. Do you really want to do that? Like, that was a common thing in purity culture. Purity culture fetishized and idolized female virginity while not ever taking into account the woman herself. It made female sexuality into a commodity for her future husband to consume and talked nothing of mutual pleasure and delight. I can keep just ranting about how that is, but I need to bring it in.
Yeah, because we have things. We want to talk about the introduction of new elements. Some people have been married for a long time and they just want to spruce it up a little bit. So, what are some of the creative ways to keep the spark alive in long-term marriages?
Yes, absolutely. So we know that women are statistically more likely to be the ones to say, I want to spice it up. I want to start using toys, things like that. And a lot of people become afraid to do that because of this internalized shame around their own sexuality. And they are afraid of their spouse looking at them and saying, ew, why are you some kind of freak? Why would you want to do that? That's not it. So a couple things on the use of toys or accessories in the bedroom. There's no biblical prohibition against that. We have archaeological evidence that of the existence of sex toys before the Bible was ever actually written. And so we know that if God truly cared about it, he had every opportunity to tell us, but he didn't, which makes them a personal conviction issue. That said, there's a few ways that you can sort of broach that conversation. One of the ways that I say is to simply send your husband my TikToks or Facebook reels and be like, hey, she's talking about this. What do you think about it? So I honestly believe that sending TikToks and Facebook reels, Facebook posts is an excellent way to introduce all kinds of topics for discussion into your marriage, going back to that intellectual intimacy, because there's a lot of, it's the new way that we as people are learning. And so I don't think that unless, your spouse has some sort of like moral objection to Facebook reels or something, I think it's an excellent way to start having conversations. Another way is to simply, I have an Amazon storefront. So say, hey, this chick I heard on a podcast has an Amazon storefront. Do you want to check out and see what she's got? And, say, you scroll things and say, oh, I've never thought about something like that. What would you think about something like that? Is another easy way. And then one of my favorite things to introduce my coaching couples to, for a variety of reasons, is the concept of a sex journal. So a sex journal does not have to be anything special, just a pretty journal that makes your heart sparkle. And what you're going to do in the sex journal is it becomes a way for you to communicate about sex with your spouse. So the first thing that I suggest couples do when starting a sex journal is you're just going to sit down and you're going to write, the last time that we had sex, I really loved blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't so much love blah, blah, blah. And the next time we have sex, I would like to try blah, blah, blah. And then what you do is you take what you've written, you give it to your spouse, and you allow him to read it. Now, the key to this is don't make it weird and stare into his soul while he's reading it. You give him privacy to read it. And then he has the opportunity to respond. So he's going to write, the last time we had sex, I really loved. I didn't so much love, and I would like to try. And then he can also get curious about what you wrote. Oh, I had no idea that you might want to start using a vibrator. What about that appeals to you? Why are you interested in that? What feelings do you feel when you think about this, right? You guys can start asking each other questions based on what you've written. And over time, you can start writing about your fantasies and your desires. But the use of a sex journal is an excellent low key way to introduce the idea of toys or fantasies or things that you would like to start experimenting with.
So, but one of the questions I definitely have to get to, because somebody asked me to ask you, how can couples navigate different levels of desire for spicing up things in their sex life? They have different levels.
So one couple wants to do kinkier things than the other one does, is what I'm getting.
I think how can couples navigate different levels of desire?
Different levels of desire. Like frequency of sex?
Frequency. I would think it's frequency.
Okay, frequency. Okay, so this is a tricky one. I'm gonna get a little ranty again.
Okay.
I do that a lot. I try not to, but it is
that's okay.
Okay. So one of the things that we need to back up and talk about is the fact that stereotypically men have responsive desire. Wind blows, he's interested. Stereotypically, women have responsive desire. Responsive desire needs to be doing sexy things with the body before the brain catches up and says, oh, yeah, I do actually want to be having sex. And society has normalized spontaneous desire as the right way to be, quote, right way to be. And that's simply not the case. And I also want to add that absolutely women can experience spontaneous desire, men can experience responsive desire. That can be a very totally normal. Especially in pregnancy, a lot of women will start experiencing spontaneous desire because the hormones start whoring around and you want to jump him the moment you see him, and even when he's not there, because hormones are crazy. So the whole like frequency thing can simply be a lack of recognition of he experiences spontaneous desire and I experience responsive desire. And now we also get into the fact that in our society today, men's egos are very wrapped up in their sexual performance. And so they often believe that there's some sort of identity thing that is wrapped up in frequency and how often they're having sex and things like that. And so we've got these conditions that are not accurate, that have been very normalized. So society is telling him, well, if she's not interested all the time, there's something wrong with her. And she's probably internalized that as well. So it could truly be that the man has an abnormal amount of desire to have sex, whereas the woman has a quote normal amount of desire for sex, but because his is so much more, like, that's where the problem is coming in, when in reality it's not her with the problem. So but that's so often what I see is like people are blaming the woman for like withholding sex or something, when reality is that's not what's happening. So there's a lot of things that should probably need to happen. One is he needs to take a look within himself and identify the role that sex plays in his marriage and his own mind. Is he using sex as a way to try and feel connected to his spouse without having to do the hard work of intimate connection? And is he relying on sex to feel loved and connected to his wife? Because remember, we talked about sex is supposed to be the celebration of intimacy you've already established before you ever reach the bedroom. And if he is trying to subvert all of those other steps and skip right to the end, you're going to have that desire mismatch and you're going to have that conflict. So he needs to take a real hard look at himself. Does he have a pornified mindset where he views sex as something that is available for his consumption? Is it something that he feels entitled to? And then and then we start getting into issues of who's carrying the majority of the mental load in the household. Is he a fully engaged and supportive husband, or is he coming home, sitting on his phone while she cooks dinner, does baths, does bedtime, and then expecting her to be available for sex? Women don't want to have sex with men who are not fully engaged partners. So is he creating and cultivating an atmosphere where she is safe to express her sexuality and cultivating desire within the marriage? So it's a really big thing with a lot of variables that go into it. But those are some of the most common themes I see in couples with frequency mismatch. And so those are the questions that I would start asking.
On for hours.
There's so much.
Yeah, there's so much. There's so much. But you know, it's it's very interesting. It's very interesting. But in the event that persons want to get in touch with you, could you give them, use this as opportunity, give them your contact information. I'm going to put it in my in the podcast notes, but you can send it to me afterwards and then I put it inside. But you can just tell them now how to get in touch with
Yes.
you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my website is thechristiansexpert.com, and I am the Christian Sexpert across all social media.
And that's it. So short
That's
and
it.
sweet. Okay. So Angela, I can't thank you enough for joining us today and sharing your wisdom on such important and often challenging topics. You brought a sense of hope and encouragement to our listeners and reminding us that intimacy in marriage is not just about physical connection, but about a deeper God-centered bond that can grow stronger over time. So thank you for being a part of this conversation and for the work that you do to help others build stronger, more loving relationship. So I thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Go have good sex.
All right. Well, I'm a widow, so my husband is deceased. I don't know how that's gonna work.
All your listeners.
All right. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.